The screams of a woman in labor echoed through the small wooden house on the edge of Georgetown, Colorado, as dawn broke over the mountain peaks in May of 1878. Selena Zimmerman clutched the midwife's hand, her face contorted in agony as she fought to bring her child into the world. Hours later, when the midwife placed a still, blue infant in her arms, something inside Selena shattered forever. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Zimmerman," the midwife whispered, her weathered face etched with genuine sorrow. "The poor thing never took a breath." Selena stared down at the perfect little face, tiny fingers and silent chest. This was her third loss. The first had come early, barely more than a few months along. The second had made it to 7 months before her body betrayed them both. This one, a full-term boy with her husband's strong chin, was the cruelest blow yet. When her husband Thomas returned from the silver mine where he worked, he found Selena cradling the cold bundle, unwilling to let go. His grief quickly turned to anger, not at her, but at the world, at God, at the unfairness of it all. But in Georgetown, folks whispered that there must be something wrong with a woman who couldn't bring a child to term, who couldn't fulfill her most natural purpose. Those whispers would grow louder in the months to come. 2 years later, Selena walked briskly down Georgetown's Main Street, her basket filled with supplies from the general store. At 32, she still carried herself with dignity despite the weight of loss that had become her constant companion. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly under a modest bonnet, her calico dress simple but well-maintained. Thomas had left 6 months after their last loss, unable to bear the emptiness of their home or the pitying glances from other miners who boasted of their growing families. As she passed the milliner's shop, she heard the unmistakable whispers. "Poor Thomas Zimmerman. Can you imagine being tied to a barren woman? My Henry says it's no wonder he left. What use is a wife who can't give a man children?" Selena kept her eyes forward, her pace steady though her heart hammered in her chest. She'd grown accustomed to such talk, but familiarity didn't lessen the sting. "Mrs. Zimmerman," called a cheerful voice, cutting through her dark thoughts. Mrs. Jenkins, the baker's wife, waved from the doorway of her shop. "I've got some fresh sourdough just out of the oven. Won't you come have a slice?" Grateful for the kindness, Selena turned toward the bakery. Mrs. Jenkins was one of the few women in town who treated her with genuine warmth rather than barely concealed disdain or pity. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. That would be lovely." Selena stepped into the warm, fragrant shop, inhaling the comforting aroma of fresh bread. "How are you faring, dear?" Mrs. Jenkins asked as she sliced a generous piece from a golden brown loaf. At 50, with 6 grown children and 11 grandchildren, Martha Jenkins might have been expected to join the chorus of judgment against a woman who couldn't bear children. Instead, she had become something of a protector to Selena in the years since Thomas's departure. "I'm managing," Selena replied, accepting the bread with a grateful smile. "The sewing is steady enough to keep a roof over my head." After Thomas left, she had turned her skill with a needle into a modest living, taking in mending and creating dresses for those who could afford them. "You know, Olivia Patterson is expecting her 4th in September," Mrs. Jenkins said conversationally, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "She was asking if you might be available to make a christening gown." Selena swallowed hard. Christening gowns were among the most painful commissions, tiny, delicate garments meant to mark a celebration she would never experience. But work was work, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "Tell her to call on me whenever it's convenient." The bell above the shop door jingled, and Mrs. Jenkins looked past Selena with a curious expression. "Well now, that's a face we don't see in town often." Selena turned to find a tall man ducking through the doorway. His wide-brimmed hat was pulled low, but she could see a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen years of sun and weather. "Mr. Reeves," Mrs. Jenkins greeted him warmly. "Come for your usual," the man nodded, his eyes briefly meeting Selena's before darting away. "Yes, madam," he said, his voice low and a bit rusty, as if from disuse. "Owen Reeves runs that small horse ranch about 5 miles outside of town," Mrs. Jenkins explained to Selena. "He's not one for socializing, but he raises the finest horses in the territory." Selena nodded politely, suddenly aware of how the small shop seemed to shrink with the man's presence. He wasn't exceptionally large, but something about him commanded space. His hands, she noticed, were calloused and strong, but they handled the coins he passed to Mrs. Jenkins with surprising gentleness. "Mrs. Zimmerman here is the finest seamstress in Georgetown," Mrs. Jenkins continued, apparently determined to make conversation despite the man's obvious discomfort. "If you're ever in need of mending, Mr. Reeves, you do well to seek her out." Owen Reeves glanced at Selena again, a flush creeping up his neck. "I'll remember that," he said quietly. As Mrs. Jenkins wrapped his bread, Selena gathered her basket. "I should be going." "Thank you for the bread, Mrs. Jenkins." "One moment, dear," the baker's wife said, disappearing into the back room. She returned with a small jar. "Some of my strawberry preserves to go with the bread. The berries came in early this year." Selena protested, but Mrs. Jenkins insisted. As she placed the jar in her basket, she became aware of Owen Reeves watching her, his expression unreadable. "Good day, Mr. Reeves," she said, giving him a small nod before turning to leave. "Madam," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. Outside, Selena took a deep breath of the clear mountain air, trying to clear her head. There had been something in the rancher's gaze that unsettled her, not in an unpleasant way, but in a manner she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Interest, perhaps, or simple curiosity. Whatever it was, she pushed the thought aside. A man like that, solitary, self-sufficient, would want a wife who could give him children, who could help populate his ranch with the next generation. Men always did, and that was something she could never offer. The following week brought an unexpected turn. Selena was in her small parlor, which doubled as her workroom, bent over a piece of delicate lace for Olivia Patterson's christening gown when a knock came at her door. Visitors were rare enough that she startled, pricking her finger with the needle. Sucking the small drop of blood from her fingertip, she made her way to the door. When she opened it, she found Owen Reeves standing on her porch, hat in hand, looking as uncomfortable as a cat in water. "Mr. Reeves," she said, surprised, "can I help you?" He cleared his throat, his eyes somewhere over her left shoulder. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I have some shirts that need mending if you're taking work." Selena hesitated only briefly before stepping back. "Of course, please come in." Owen ducked through the doorway, clutching a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Her house was modest but meticulously kept, with simple furnishings and a few touches that reflected her pressed wildflowers in frames on the walls, a patchwork quilt of vibrant colors draped over a chair. "You can set your things there," she said, indicating a small table where she assessed clients' needs. "Would you like some tea? I just made a pot." "No, thank you, madam." He carefully placed the package on the table and remained standing, hat still clutched in his large hands. As she unwrapped the bundle, she found 3 shirts, all showing signs of hard-wear, torn seams, missing buttons, one with a significant tear across the back. "These have seen better days, Mr. Reeves," she observed with a small smile, trying to put him at ease. "Been busy with the spring foals," he explained, finally meeting her eyes. "Haven't had time for new ones." Selena assessed the damage. "I can have these ready by week's end if that suits you." He nodded, watching as her nimble fingers examined the garments. "That's fine." An awkward silence fell between them. Owen shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and Selena became acutely aware of how alone they were in her small house. It wasn't proper, really, but she'd lost her standing in the community long ago. Still, she found herself wishing she'd suggested they conduct their business on the porch. "I should get back to the ranch," he finally said, breaking the silence. "How much do I owe you?" She quoted a fair price, which he accepted without negotiation. As he reached into his pocket for the coins, he added, "Mrs. Jenkins speaks highly of you." "She's been very kind to me," Selena replied, accepting the payment. "Not everyone in town has been, though," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. It wasn't a question. Selena stiffened. "Mr. Reeves, I apologize," he cut in, a flush creeping up his neck again. "That was forward of me. It's just small towns and their talk. I know something about that." She studied him for a moment, trying to reconcile this perceptive comment with the taciturn man who could barely meet her eyes. "Yes. Well, Georgetown has its share of opinions about those who don't fit neatly into their expectations." Owen nodded, then settled his hat back on his head. "I'll return on Friday for the shirts, if that's acceptable." "Of course." At the door, he paused and turned back to her. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I was wondering. That is, if you're not opposed. My ranch has a fair number of fruit trees. Apples mostly, but some plums too. They'll be ripening soon, and I always have more than I can use. Perhaps you might like some when they're ready." The offer caught her off guard. "That's very generous, Mr. Reeves." "It's nothing," he said, suddenly looking embarrassed. "Just seems a waste to let good fruit fall and rot." After he left, Selena stood at the door for a long moment, puzzling over the strange encounter. Owen Reeves had a reputation as a loner, a man who spoke only when necessary and avoided town whenever possible. Yet he'd made a special trip just for some mending that could have waited, and then offered her fruit from his orchard. She turned back to her sewing, but found her thoughts drifting to the quiet rancher with the gentle hands and perceptive eyes. Friday came, and with it, Owen's return. This time, Selena was prepared, having arranged to meet him on the small porch of her house where they could conduct their business without raising eyebrows. "They look better than new," Owen commented as he examined the shirts she'd mended. She'd done more than just repair them. She'd reinforced worn areas, added sturdy patches where needed, and even managed to remove some of the more stubborn stains. "I take pride in my work, Mr. Reeves," she replied. He nodded, carefully folding the shirts. "I can see that." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you be opposed to me bringing more work your way? I've got some trousers that could use similar attention." "I would appreciate the business," she said honestly. Before he could reply, a group of women passed by on the street. Mrs. Thompson, the banker's wife and one of Selena's most vocal critics, was among them. She slowed, eyeing the pair on the porch with obvious interest. "Mrs. Zimmerman," she called, her voice syrupy with false sweetness. "How enterprising of you to find new clientele." Selena felt her cheeks burn. The implication was clear enough. A widow receiving a bachelor at her home could only mean one thing in Mrs. Thompson's mind. Before she could formulate a response, Owen stepped forward, his posture suddenly straighter, his voice firm. "Good afternoon, ladies. Mrs. Zimmerman has been kind enough to repair some work shirts for me. Finest stitching I've seen in the territory." Mrs. Thompson's smile tightened. "Is that so, Mr. Reeves? We so rarely see you in town. I didn't realize you were acquainted with certain residents." "I find I prefer the company of those who mind their own affairs and speak with kindness," Owen replied evenly. "Good day, ladies." He tipped his hat and turned back to Selena as the women moved on, their whispers already starting anew. "I apologize for speaking out of turn," he said quietly. "There's no need to apologize," Selena assured him, touched by his defense. "Though you've probably just ensured yourself a place in tomorrow's gossip." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't be the first time." He gathered his shirts and prepared to leave. "I'll bring those trousers by next week if that suits you." "That would be fine, Mr. Reeves." As he mounted his horse, a handsome bay gelding with intelligent eyes, he paused. "Mrs. Zimmerman, would you consider? That is, the apple trees I mentioned. They're starting to ripen. If you wanted to come out to the ranch and pick some yourself, you'd be welcome, any day that's convenient for you." The invitation surprised her. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition. Like I said, there's more than I can use." His eyes finally met hers directly. "And I have a mare about to foal. If you've any interest in horses, she's a sight to behold." Selena hadn't been on a horse in years, not since Thomas left and she'd had to sell theirs to make ends meet. But she had loved riding once, loved the freedom of it. "Perhaps I will, Mr. Reeves." "Thank you for the invitation." He nodded, satisfied, and rode away. Selena watched him go, wondering what had possessed her to even consider the offer. A respectable widow didn't visit a bachelor's ranch unchaperoned. But then, she wasn't considered entirely respectable anymore, was she? 3 days later, Selena found herself on the stagecoach that ran between Georgetown and the outlying areas, heading toward Owen Reeves's ranch. She debated with herself endlessly before deciding to accept his invitation, and even now wasn't entirely sure why she was going. Perhaps it was simple curiosity, or the prospect of fresh apples, or maybe just the chance to spend a few hours away from the judging eyes of Georgetown. The driver let her off at the turnoff to Reeves' ranch, a well-maintained dirt road leading away from the main route. "You sure about this, Mrs. Zimmerman?" the driver asked, eyeing the mile-long road ahead dubiously. "I can take you right up to the house if you'd prefer." "This is fine, thank you," she assured him. "I could use the walk." As the stagecoach pulled away, Selena adjusted her bonnet against the bright Colorado sun and began the walk toward the distant buildings visible through a stand of aspen trees. The day was perfect clear skies, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, and the mountains rising majestically in the background. Owen's ranch came into view as she rounded a bend in the road. It was more impressive than she'd expected, a solid, 2-story house built of locally quarried stone and timber. A large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and well-maintained corrals where horses of various colors grazed or dozed in the summer heat. Behind the house, she could see the orchard he'd mentioned, the trees heavy with ripening fruit. As she approached, a dog began barking, a large, shaggy creature that bounded toward her with enthusiasm rather than menace. Behind the dog came Owen, emerging from the barn in shirt sleeves, his expression shifting from concern to surprise when he recognized her. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he called, hurrying to intercept the dog. "Down, Bear," he commanded, and the dog immediately sat, though its tail continued to thump against the ground. "I didn't expect you today." "I hope I'm not interrupting your work," she said, suddenly uncertain. "You said any day would be convenient." "No, not at all," he assured her quickly. "I'm glad you came. I just would have arranged to fetch you if I'd known." "The walk was pleasant," she said, looking around with appreciation. "Your ranch is beautiful, Mr. Reeves." A flush of pride crossed his face. "Thank you. It's taken 8 years to get it this way." He gestured toward the house. "Would you like to come in for some refreshment before we visit the orchard? The journey must have been tiring." Selena hesitated only briefly before nodding. As they walked toward the house, The dog, Bear, trotted alongside her, occasionally looking up as if checking that she was still there. "He likes you," Owen observed. "He's not usually so friendly with strangers." "I've always had a way with animals," she replied, reaching down to pat the dog's head. "They don't judge the way people do." Owen gave her a thoughtful look but didn't comment. The interior of his home surprised her as much as the exterior had. It was simply furnished but immaculately clean, with polished wood floors, sturdy, well-crafted furniture, and windows that let in abundant natural light. One wall held a bookshelf filled with volumes unusual for a rancher, in her experience. "You read," she observed, moving closer to examine the titles. "History, some poetry, practical guides to horse breeding and veterinary care, and several novels." "Winter nights are long," he said by way of explanation, busying himself with pouring 2 glasses of cool water from a pitcher. "And I find books good company." "As do I," Selena said, accepting the water gratefully. They sat at a solid oak table in the kitchen, an awkward silence falling between them again. Selena found herself studying Owen more carefully than she had before. In his own environment, he seemed more at ease, though still reserved. His face, now that she could see it clearly in the bright kitchen, was handsome in a weathered way, strong lines, clear blue eyes, and that sandy brown beard that softened his jaw. "You've been in Georgetown long?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. "Nearly 10 years now. My husband," she paused, correcting herself. "My former husband brought us west from Pennsylvania after we married. He had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. But he left," Owen stated simply. Selena nodded, her fingers tightening around the water glass. "Yes, 3 years ago." Owen seemed to consider this. "Because you couldn't have children," he said quietly, not a question. The bluntness of his statement startled her. "Mr. Reeves, I apologize," he said quickly. "I spoke out of turn again. I've heard the talk in town when I go in for supplies. It didn't seem fair what they say about you." A lump formed in Selena's throat. She swallowed hard against it. "Life isn't fair, Mr. Reeves. Surely a rancher knows that better than most." He nodded, his expression somber. "Indeed." After a moment he stood. "Would you like to see the mare I mentioned? She's close to her time." Grateful for the change of subject, Selena agreed, and they made their way to the barn, Bear trotting ahead of them. Inside, it was cool and fragrant with the smell of fresh hay and horses. Several heads turned their way as they entered, nickering softly in greeting. In a large stall at the end stood a magnificent black mare, her coat gleaming like polished ebony, her belly swollen with the foal she carried. "This is Midnight," Owen said, his voice softening with evident affection for the animal. "Best brood mare I've ever owned. This will be her 5th foal." Selena approached the stall carefully. The mare watched her with intelligent, liquid eyes, neither fearful nor aggressive. "She's beautiful," Selena breathed, extending a hand slowly. Midnight stretched her neck forward to sniff the offered hand, then allowed Selena to stroke her velvety nose. "She likes you," Owen said, sounding pleased. "She's usually more cautious with strangers. When is she due?" "Any day now," he replied. "I've been sleeping in the tack room to keep an eye on her." He nodded toward a small room off to the side where a simple cot was visible. Selena continued to stroke the mare, mesmerized by the gentle power of the animal. "What will you name the foal?" "Depends on its coloring and personality," Owen said. "Midnight's foals have all been different. The last one was a sorrel colt with a blaze like a lightning bolt, called him Thunder." They spent some time with the horses, Owen introducing her to each one and explaining their lineage and training. His knowledge was impressive, and it was clear that he cared deeply for each animal on his ranch. Afterward, they walked to the orchard where Owen provided her with a basket for apple picking. As they moved among the trees, Selena found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. There was something peaceful about the ranch, about the uncomplicated companionship of this quiet man who asked so little of her but seemed to understand so much. "Why did you invite me here, Mr. Reeves?" she asked finally, reaching up to pluck a particularly fine apple from a branch. Owen was silent for a long moment, considering a tree rather than looking at her. "Truthfully, please." He turned to face her then, his expression earnest. "I've seen you in town over the years, always composed, always dignified, despite how some folks treat you. I admired that." He paused, seeming to search for words. "And you looked lonely. I know something about loneliness, Mrs. Zimmerman." The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep inside her. "Please," she said softly, "call me Selena." A small smile curved his lips. "Selena," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "And I'm Owen." The moment held a strange intimacy, there among the apple trees with the afternoon sun filtering through the leaves. Selena was the first to look away, adding another apple to her already full basket. "I should be getting back to town before it grows too late," she said, though reluctance colored her voice. "Of course." Owen took the basket from her, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "I'll drive you in the wagon." "Oh, I couldn't ask you to. I wouldn't hear of you taking the stage coach this late," he insisted. "Besides, I need to bring those trousers I mentioned for mending." The trip back to Georgetown was filled with easier conversation than they'd managed before. Owen told her about his journey west from Missouri after the war, about building his ranch from almost nothing, about his dreams for breeding horses that combined beauty, speed, and endurance. Selena found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her early happy years with Thomas, her love of creating beautiful garments from simple cloth. As they approached town, however, she grew quieter, aware that they would soon be subject to the scrutinizing gaze of Georgetown's citizens. Owen seemed to sense her withdrawal. "I enjoyed your company today," he said as they neared her house. "You're welcome at the ranch anytime." "Thank you for the apples," she replied, "and for showing me your horses." He helped her down from the wagon, handling her as carefully as if she were made of porcelain. For a man who worked with large animals daily, his gentleness was striking. "The trousers," he remembered suddenly, reaching back into the wagon for a bundle, "if it's not too much trouble." "Not at all," she assured him, taking the package. "I'll have them ready by week's end," he nodded, seeming reluctant to leave. "Selena," he began, then stopped, uncertain. "Yes." "Would you? That is, might I call on you properly sometime, not for mending, but just to talk, perhaps?" The request stunned her. It had been years since any man had shown interest in her company for its own sake. "Owen, I'm not sure that would be wise." "You must know what they say about me in town." His expression hardened slightly. "I don't much care what they say." "Perhaps you should," she said gently. "A man in your position, a successful rancher, could have his pick of young women who could give you children, who could help build a family on that beautiful land of yours." Pain flashed across his face, so briefly she might have imagined it. "I've had my chance at that," he said quietly. It didn't end well. Before she could ask what he meant, they were interrupted by the approach of Reverend Collins and his wife, out for an evening stroll. "Mrs. Zimmerman," the Reverend greeted her, his eyes taking in Owen and the wagon loaded with apples. "Mr. Reeves. Don't often see you in town." "Reverend," Owen acknowledged with a nod. "Mrs. Collins." "Mr. Reeves kindly brought me some apples from his orchard," Selena explained, feeling an irrational need to justify their association. "How neighborly, Mrs. Collins commented, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. Owen straightened, his jaw set in a way that Selena was beginning to recognize as a sign of his rarely roused temper. "Mrs. Zimmerman was good enough to visit my ranch today to select the fruit herself. She's also agreed to mend some clothing for me." "I see," said Reverend Collins, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "Well, we won't keep you. Good evening to you both." As the couple moved on, Selena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "And so the gossip begins anew," she murmured. Owen's expression was troubled. "I'm sorry if I've made things difficult for you." "You haven't," she assured him. "They would find something to whisper about regardless." After a moment's hesitation, he asked again, "May I call on you, Selena?" Looking into his earnest blue eyes, Selena found she couldn't refuse. "Yes, Owen, you may." The smile that spread across his face transformed him, erasing the habitual solemnity and revealing a warmth she hadn't fully glimpsed before. "Sunday afternoon, then, if that suits you." Sunday would be lovely. As Owen drove away, Selena stood on her porch with a basket of apples and a strange fluttering in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Hope, perhaps, or simply the pleasure of being seen, truly seen by someone who didn't look at her and see only what she lacked. True to his word, Owen appeared at her door on Sunday afternoon, looking somewhat uncomfortable in clothes clearly reserved for special occasions, a clean black coat over a white shirt, his hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, which he presented to her with endearing awkwardness. "These are beautiful," Selena said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Please come in while I put them in water." The next few hours passed in pleasant conversation. They discovered shared interests in literature and music, though Owen admitted he hadn't attended a musical performance since leaving Missouri. Selena spoke of her desire to someday see San Francisco, a city that had captured her imagination through travelers' tales. "Perhaps you will one day," Owen said. "They say the railroad makes travel easier every year." "Perhaps," she agreed, though they both knew a seamstress's modest income left little room for such adventures. As the weeks passed, Owen's visits became regular Sunday afternoons without fail, and occasionally a midweek visit ostensibly to bring or collect some item of clothing for mending, though they both knew the garments were merely an excuse. Georgetown, predictably, buzzed with speculation. Some were scandalized by the apparent courtship, while others found it a romantic diversion from the everyday routine of the mining town. Mrs. Jenkins, ever Selena's champion, made a point of telling anyone who would listen that Mr. Reeves was a fine man of excellent character, and Mrs. Zimmerman deserved happiness after all she'd endured. For Selena, these months brought a gradual awakening. She found herself looking forward to Owen's visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. After Thomas's abandonment, she had carefully locked away any expectation of male companionship, convincing herself that she was content with her solitary life. Owen's steady presence and quiet regard were causing cracks in that carefully constructed fortress. One evening in late summer, Owen invited her to the ranch for supper. "Midnight's foal was born last week," he told her. "A little filly, black as her mother with a perfect white star on her forehead. I thought you might like to see her." Selena accepted, ignoring the knowing looks from her neighbors as Owen helped her into his wagon. The ranch was even more beautiful in the golden light of evening, the mountains behind it painted in purples and blues as the sun began its descent. The foal was enchanting all spindly legs and curiosity, staying close to her mother but venturing bold little explorations of her stall. "She's perfect," Selena breathed, watching as the foal investigated Owen's outstretched hand. "I'm calling her Starlight," he said, gently stroking the foal's neck. "Because of this." He touched the distinctive white marking on her forehead. "It suits her," Selena agreed. Dinner was simple but delicious: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh green beans from Owen's garden, followed by an apple pie that he admitted with some embarrassment that he'd purchased from Mrs. Jenkins. "I can raise horses and grow vegetables," he said, "but baking is beyond my abilities." After the meal, they sat on the porch, watching as twilight deepened into night and the first stars appeared in the sky. A comfortable silence had developed between them over the months, no longer awkward but rather a shared peace that required no words. "Selena," Owen said finally, his voice soft in the gathering darkness, "there's something I need to tell you." She turned to look at him, noting the serious set of his features. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I haven't been entirely honest with you. Or rather, I haven't told you the whole truth about myself." A chill ran through her. "Go on." "I was married once back in Missouri." His words came slowly, as if each one cost him effort. "Her name was Rebecca. We were young. I was 22, she was 19. We had a son the following year." Selena remained silent, allowing him to continue at his own pace. "When Jimmy was 3, Rebecca became pregnant again. The birth, there were complications." His voice grew hoarse. "We lost the baby, a little girl, and Rebecca, she hemorrhaged. The doctor couldn't stop the bleeding." "Oh, Owen," Selena whispered, her heart aching for him. "I'm so sorry. Jimmy and I managed for a while, but without a mother. And I was broken in those days, half mad with grief and anger. My sister took him in, said she'd raise him alongside her own children until I got myself straight." His hands clenched in his lap. "I came west, intending to make a fresh start and send for him once I was established. But by the time I had the ranch up and running, she'd grown attached to him. He'd grown attached to her family. They had a stable home, a mother figure, cousins he thought of as siblings." "You let him stay with them?" Selena guessed. Owen nodded, his profile rigid against the darkening sky. "It seemed selfish to uproot him again, to bring him to a ranch in the middle of nowhere with just a father who spent most of his time with horses. I visit when I can, send money for his education. He's 15 now, nearly a man." "Does he know you're his father?" "Yes, though he calls me Uncle Owen now. It's easier for everyone that way." The revelation settled between them, reshaping Selena's understanding of this solitary man. "Why are you telling me this now, Owen?" He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the faint light from the windows. "Because I need you to understand why the things people say about you in town make me so damned angry. I know what it is to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. To have people look at you and see only what you've lost, not who you are." Selena felt tears prick her eyes. "And who am I, Owen? A barren woman abandoned by her husband, scraping by on the edges of respectability?" "No," he said firmly, reaching for her hand. "You're Selena. You're strong and kind and beautiful. You create beauty with your hands. You face each day with dignity despite the cruelty of those around you. You're someone who makes me feel less alone in this world just by existing." A tear slipped down her cheek. Owen reached up to brush it away, his touch infinitely tender. "I'm telling you this now," he continued, "because I need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see what you can't give me. I see all that you are, all that you could be to me if you'd consider it." "Consider what?" she asked, though she knew the answer, had perhaps known it for weeks now. "Being my wife," he said simply. "Building a life with me here on this ranch." Selena drew a shaky breath. "Owen, you must understand, I can never give you children. The doctors say there's something wrong with me, something that prevents me from carrying to term. If you married me, you would be choosing a childless future." "I already have a son," he reminded her gently. "And I have no desire to replace what I lost with Rebecca. That part of my life is over." He squeezed her hand. "What I want now, at 38, is a partner, someone to share my days and nights, to build this ranch into something we can be proud of together. Someone who understands loss but refuses to be defined by it." Selena found herself speechless, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his eyes and the magnitude of what he was offering. "You don't have to answer now," Owen assured her. "Take all the time you need to consider. I know it's a big decision." "It is," she agreed softly, "but I don't need time, Owen." "My answer is yes." The joy that transformed his face in that moment was something Selena knew she would remember until her dying day. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, his embrace gentle but secure, as if he feared she might change her mind if he let go. "You are loved, Selena," he whispered against her hair. "You are so deeply loved." In that moment, on a porch under the Colorado stars, Selena felt the last piece of her broken heart begin to heal. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by Reverend Collins. Mrs. Jenkins hosted a small reception at the bakery, attended by the few townsfolk who genuinely wished them well. Most of Georgetown observed with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment, unable to comprehend why a successful rancher would choose a barren widow when there were plenty of young, fertile women who would have gladly accepted his proposal. Selena moved to the ranch the day after the wedding, bringing her sewing equipment and personal belongings. Owen had cleared a sunny room at the front of the house for her workroom, installing large windows that let in abundant natural light. The gesture touched her deeply, this practical evidence that he valued her work and wanted her to continue it, even as she took on the role of rancher's wife. The first months of marriage brought adjustments for both of them. Owen, accustomed to solitude and self-reliance, had to learn to share his space and his decisions. Selena, used to answering to no one but herself, found it strange to consider another person in her daily choices. But underlying these small challenges was a profound sense of rightness, of having found in each other exactly what they needed. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow and limiting their trips to town. Selena found she didn't miss Georgetown much. The ranch became a self-contained world, the house warm and bright against the cold outside, the barn filled with the comforting sounds and smells of the horses, and between them, a deepening bond that surpassed anything she had known in her first marriage. In bed, Owen was as gentle and considerate as he was in all things, taking his time to learn what pleased her, never rushing or demanding. For Selena, who had come to associate physical intimacy with disappointment and eventual abandonment, it was a revelation to be with a man who genuinely desired her pleasure as much as his own. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Owen confessed one night as they lay together, the room illuminated only by moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. "After Rebecca died, I thought that part of me was gone forever." Selena traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I know. After Thomas left, I convinced myself I was better off alone, that I didn't need or want a man's companionship." "And now," he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. She smiled, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "Now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Spring came late but gloriously to the high country, bringing new foals to the ranch and a flurry of activity as Owen prepared for the season's breeding program. Selena continued her sewing business, with clients now coming to the ranch for fittings and consultations. To her surprise, being Mrs. Reeves seemed to have elevated her, standing women who had once snubbed her now sought her skills, though whether from genuine appreciation or simple curiosity about her new life, she couldn't be sure. In May, a letter arrived from Missouri that brought both joy and apprehension. Owen's son, Jimmy, now 16, had expressed a desire to spend the summer at the ranch, to get to know his father better and learn about horse breeding. "Are you sure you're comfortable with this?" Owen asked Selena as they discussed the letter over dinner. "Having him here will change things." "He's your son, Owen," she replied simply. "Of course he should come. He may be uncertain about you," Owen warned. The idea of his father remarrying might be difficult for him to accept. Selena nodded, understanding the concern. "We'll take it slowly. Give him time to adjust." Jimmy arrived on the stagecoach in early June, a lanky youth with his father's blue eyes and a serious expression that lightened when he caught sight of Owen waiting for him. Their reunion was both awkward and touching. Neither quite knew how to bridge the years of separation, but the blood connection between them was unmistakable in their similar mannerisms and expressions. Selena hung back, allowing them their moment before Owen introduced her. "Jimmy, this is Selena, my wife." The boy regarded her with wary curiosity. "Madam," he said politely, if somewhat stiffly. "I'm very glad to meet you, Jimmy," she replied warmly. "Your father has told me so much about you." The first days were tense, with Jimmy observing her as if trying to determine her role and whether she posed some kind of threat. Selena gave him space, never pushing for a relationship, allowing him to set the pace of their acquaintance. It was the horses that finally broke the ice between them. Jimmy had inherited his father's affinity for the animals, and his obvious delight in learning about the breeding program gave them a neutral topic of conversation. Gradually, meals became less stilted, and occasionally she would catch him watching her with his father, his expression thoughtful rather than suspicious. One evening, as she sat on the porch mending one of Owen's shirts, Jimmy approached her hesitantly. "Mrs. Reeves?" "Yes, Jimmy," she said, setting aside her work. He sat on the step below her, looking out at the mountains rather than at her. "Pa says you lost babies, that you couldn't have children with your first husband, and that's why he left." The directness of the statement took her aback, though she supposed she shouldn't be surprised. Teenagers often lack the filters that adults developed. "Yes," she answered simply. "That's true." Jimmy nodded, still not looking at her. "So you and Pa won't be having any children together?" "No, we won't." He seemed to consider this. "Is that why you married him? Because he already had a son, so he wouldn't mind?" The question stung, but Selena recognized the vulnerability behind it. "No, Jimmy, I married your father because I love him and he loves me. We both had lives before we met. He had you and your mother. I had my first husband and the babies I lost. Those experiences shaped us, but they're not why we chose each other." Finally, he turned to look at her. "He's different with you, happier." "I hope so," she said softly. "I'm certainly happier with him." After a moment, Jimmy nodded as if he'd made some internal decision. "Pa's teaching me to break the new colt tomorrow. Would you like to watch?" Selena recognized the olive branch for what it was. "I'd like that very much, Jimmy. Thank you." The remainder of the summer passed in a blur of activity. Jimmy proved to be a quick learner with the horses and a surprisingly good companion around the ranch. By July, the initial awkwardness had given way to a comfortable routine, with the three of them working together during the days and enjoying quiet evenings on the porch or around the kitchen table. When August arrived, bringing with it the time for Jimmy's return to Missouri, Selena was surprised by how much she would miss him. The boy had become part of their lives in a way she hadn't anticipated. The night before his departure, after Jimmy had gone to bed, Owen found Selena in their bedroom, her eyes suspiciously bright. "What's wrong?" he asked, concerned. She shook her head, smiling despite the tears threatening to fall. "Nothing's wrong, I'll miss him." Owen gathered her in his arms. "He'll be back. He's already talking about Christmas and maybe returning next summer if his aunt agrees." "I'd like that," Selena said, resting her head against his chest. "He's a wonderful boy, Owen. You should be proud." "I am," he murmured, stroking her hair. "And I'm grateful that you've welcomed him so readily into our life." The following spring brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Selena was in the garden, planting the season's vegetables, when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Looking up, she was startled to see Thomas Zimmerman at the reins, looking much as he had when he left Georgetown 3 years earlier. "Selena," he called, pulling the wagon to a stop. "I was told in town I'd find you here." She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thomas, this is a surprise." He climbed down from the wagon, approaching her with a confidence that felt oddly presumptuous given their history. "You're looking well. Marriage agrees with you, apparently." "Yes, it does," she agreed, making no move to embrace him or invite him closer. "What brings you to Colorado? Last I heard you were in California." Thomas had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I was. Things didn't work out quite as I'd hoped." He glanced around the ranch appreciatively. "You've done well for yourself. Reeves has a good reputation in these parts." "Owen is a good man," she said simply. An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "I wondered if we might talk privately. There are some matters I'd like to discuss with you." Before Selena could respond, she heard Owen's voice behind her. "Anything you have to say to my wife can be said in front of me." He moved to stand beside her, not touching her but close enough that his presence was unmistakably protective. Thomas's expression tightened. "This is a private matter between former spouses." "We have no private matters, Thomas," Selena said firmly. "Whatever you came to say, you can say it now to both of us." He hesitated, then sighed. "Very well. The truth is, Selena, I made a mistake leaving as I did. I've had time to reflect, and I realize now that children aren't the only measure of a marriage's worth." Selena stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You're saying you regret divorcing me?" "I'm saying I acted hastily, out of disappointment and wounded pride." His gaze flickered to Owen, then back to her. "Obviously, I understand that you've moved on, but I thought you deserved to hear my apology at least." Owen remained silent, allowing Selena to respond as she saw fit. She appreciated his restraint, knowing how difficult it must be for him to stand by while her former husband attempted to make amends. "Thank you for the apology, Thomas," she said finally. "I accept it. But you should know that your leaving was ultimately a blessing, though it didn't feel like one at the time. It allowed me to find Owen, to build a life that's more fulfilling than anything I had before." Thomas nodded, his expression a complex mix of regret and resignation. "I'm glad for you, then." "Truly." He turned to Owen. "You're a fortunate man, Reeves." "I know it," Owen replied simply. After Thomas left, Selena stood in the garden for a long moment, processing the unexpected encounter. Owen waited patiently beside her, respecting her need to collect her thoughts. "Are you all right?" he asked finally. She turned to him, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, better than all right." She reached for his hand. 3 years ago, his rejection nearly destroyed me. Today, it meant nothing because I know my worth now, because I have you." Owen pulled her into his arms, his embrace secure and familiar. "You'll always have me, Selena, for as long as I draw breath." That summer, a letter arrived that would change their lives in an unexpected way. It was from Owen's sister in Missouri, bearing news that left them both stunned. A young woman in their community, unmarried and expecting a child, was seeking a family to adopt her baby. Knowing Owen and Selena's situation, his sister had thought of them immediately. "She wants to know if we'd consider it," Owen said, reading the letter aloud at the kitchen table. "The baby is due in October. Her only condition is that the child be raised far away where no one knows its origins. Selena's hand trembled as she reached for the letter. She wants us to adopt her baby, it seems so. Owen watched her carefully. What do you think, Selena? It's a lot to consider, I know. A baby, she whispered, the word both precious and painful given her history. Owen, do you want this? Would you want to raise another child at your age? He covered her hand with his. I'm not too old to be a father again, if that's what you're asking. But what matters more is whether this is something you want, after everything you've been through. Selena closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine it a child in their home, a baby to love and nurture, to watch grow. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Yes, she said finally, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. Yes, I want this. If you do. The months that followed were a flurry of preparation. They converted the small room next to theirs into a nursery, with Owen crafting a cradle from ranch timber and Selena sewing tiny garments in the evenings. Jimmy, informed by letter of the development, responded with cautious enthusiasm about having a little brother or sister. October arrived, bringing with it anxiety and anticipation. When the telegram came announcing the birth, a healthy baby girl, Selena wept in Owen's arms, overwhelmed by the knowledge that somewhere in Missouri, a child who would soon be theirs was drawing her first breaths. Owen made the journey east alone, Selena being needed at the ranch during the busy fall season. The 2 weeks of his absence were among the longest of her life. She filled the days with work, trying not to dwell on the fears that occasionally surfaced. What if the mother changed her mind? What if the baby didn't thrive on the journey home? What if, after everything, Selena wasn't meant to be a mother after all? When Owen's wagon finally appeared on the road to the ranch, Selena ran to meet it, her heart pounding. He drew the horses to a stop, and she saw the small bundle in his arms, wrapped snugly against the autumn chill. "Selena," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "meet our daughter." She reached up as he carefully transferred the infant to her arms. The baby was tiny but perfect, with wisps of dark hair and a rosebud mouth that pursed slightly in sleep. As Selena cradled her, the infant's eyes fluttered open dark blue, as most newborns were, but with a gaze that seemed to look directly into Selena's soul. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "I'm your mother." They named her Hope, a testament to what she represented for both of them, a new beginning, a future neither had dared imagine. The adjustment to parenthood was challenging, especially for Selena, who had never expected to experience the midnight feedings, the constant vigilance, the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a completely dependent being. But there was joy too, incredible, heart-expanding joy in the first smiles, the tiny fingers that curled trustingly around her own, the weight of the baby against her shoulder as she sang her to sleep. Owen proved to be a devoted father, as patient with his infant daughter as he was with his most skittish colt. By Christmas, when Jimmy arrived for his promised visit, Hope had become the center around which the ranch revolved. The teenager was initially uncertain around the baby, but soon found himself captivated by her toothless grins and determined efforts to grab his fingers. "She has Pa's eyes," he observed one evening as the family sat around the fire, Hope cradled in Selena's arms. Selena smiled, recognizing the acceptance in his words. "Yes, I think she does." As the years passed, the Reeves Ranch thrived. Owen's breeding program gained national recognition, with buyers coming from as far as Kentucky to purchase his stock. Selena's sewing business evolved into a successful small enterprise specializing in fine riding attire, her designs sought after by wealthy equestrians throughout the West. Hope grew into a spirited, curious child with her adoptive father's affinity for horses and her mother's creative instincts. When she was 5, Jimmy, now a young man of 21, moved permanently to the ranch, having decided to partner with his father in the business rather than pursue opportunities in Missouri. Georgetown, which had once been the source of so much pain for Selena, gradually became simply the nearest town, a place to purchase supplies and socialize occasionally. The whispers about her barrenness faded as people came to know her as Mrs. Reeves, mother to Hope, an accomplished seamstress. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Owen surprised Selena with a trip to San Francisco, fulfilling the dream she had mentioned during their courtship. As they stood on a hill overlooking the bay, the city spread out below them in all its bustling glory, he took her hand in his. "Are you happy, Selena?" he asked, his voice carrying the same gentle concern it had when he first defended her from Georgetown's gossips all those years ago. She turned to him, this quiet man who had seen her worth when others saw only her failures, who had whispered, "You are loved," and proven it every day since. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. That night, in their hotel room with the sounds of the city drifting through the open window, Owen held her close as he had countless nights before. "You know," he murmured against her hair, "when I rode into town that day for bread, I never imagined I'd find everything I didn't know I was missing." Selena smiled in the darkness. "And I never imagined that being mocked and judged would lead me to the greatest blessing of my life." "Which is?" he prompted, a smile in his voice. "Being truly seen," she replied, "by someone who loves me exactly as I am." In the years that followed, as Hope grew into a young woman, as Jimmy married and brought grandchildren into their lives, as the ranch prospered and changed with the times, Selena often thought back to that moment in Mrs. Jenkins' bakery when a tall, awkward rancher had first caught her eye. How close she had come to missing this life, to allowing Georgetown's cruel judgments to define her worth. Instead, she had found the courage to reach for happiness, to believe the words Owen had whispered to her that night on his porch. "You are loved." Not despite her inability to bear children, not with conditions or reservations, but completely, unconditionally, for exactly who she was. And in the end, that love had given her everything she had once thought forever beyond her reach: a family, a home, and the profound knowledge that her value as a woman had never been determined by her fertility, but by her capacity to love and be loved in return.